Alright, YouTube, this is sort of a part two to the video that I made over a year ago called I Can Help You Convert to Satanism. Um, what has happened is that as my web presence has grown, not just on YouTube, but on my blogs and so forth, as things have gotten more interconnected, a lot of people are going to the blog because of the literary works that I put there, and then they come to YouTube and they ask me questions and so forth. What's happened is that I'm actually being overloaded with people that want me to talk to them about Satanism. People want my email, people want my Facebook, people want my Skype, and I'm only one person. Uh, and it's impossible for me to actually deal with every single individual at this point who's asking me. It's gone from a trickle. It's gone from, I think, right after I made it, a few dozen people asked me, and then for a while there was nobody. And then a steady trickle came in of people who wanted to talk about Satanism, and as for some reason several of my videos, other videos on Satanism too, have gotten more and more popular. Actually, one of them is now the second most watched video on my channel on a week-to-week basis. I'm getting sometimes dozens of people every single day asking me to literally help them convert to Satanism. The problem being my own version of Satanism is more than simply, oh, don't be an atheist and here's, the Satanic Commandments or something. I don't do the LaVeyan game. I'm not a fan of the Church of Satan. My version of Satanism, which is just as valid as anybody else's, is more in depth. It's essentially a reformational movement on Satanism. It includes aspects of sociology and psychology and so forth that the other groups within Satanism, which are primarily, they either worship some pagan entity, which is fine, I'm not denigrating them, they worship a pagan entity, they're more of a theistic or religious group, or they're like the Church of Satan, they're purely atheistic, they primarily exist to make money and troll people. And to bother Christians. These are very worthy endeavors on their own, but I wanted to make something that went beyond that. So what I've decided to do, I've got a publisher now for my second book, and that's all in the works. Currently, I've got to finish that up. I've started work on a third book, which is going to contain the basic precepts of this new version of Satanism that I myself have developed and am continuing to develop currently. What I decided to do was, rather than try to individually explain to thousands of people, because now it's well over 1,000 people have asked me about this. These are mostly teenagers and young 20-somethings in college. A lot of these people have had familial problems. A lot of these people have had mental problems. The reason being they've been screwed up by a society that keeps telling them, oh, well, you should feel guilty for all your behaviors, you should be afraid of hell. That's exactly what I'm trying to combat, trying to help these people stop being afraid of some elderly man in the sky with a wooden staff who will smite them and send them to hell. No longer needing to feel guilty about imagined sins like, oh, I had premarital sex 5 years ago, I must be going to hell. Well, no, you're not, because no such place exists. And I'm trying to help people through this. And I'm developing part of it as I go along, because as I'm interacting with these individuals, I'm myself realizing what works and what doesn't work. Well, that helps refine the philosophy, because if you can get to a point at which most of these individuals are honestly feeling better about themselves, it's therapeutic for them. That's the purpose of my brand of Satanism. It's not simply just that selfish philosophy of LaVey. So I've decided to write a book. My third book doesn't have a title yet. I've just barely started. I've got the outline. I've got the beginning of several chapters going. I decided to simply put it in book form, and this one won't be like my first two. My first two books are being released by small publishers. They're being released hardcover and leather bound. They're going to be more expensive. They're going to be printed in small batches. Because of the number of people that seem interested in this topic, I think that using a small publisher for it would be insane. These people are quite young. Most of these people are younger than me. Probably can't spare $50, $60 for a book, so why would you make it hardcover? That wouldn't make any sense. And there's more demand for it. When I'm making, some sort of ritual book, well, that's all well and good, but there's not going to be as much demand for it as a psychological tract like this that I'm currently making, that could potentially reach tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people if the right publisher accepts it. So I plan to write it and try to contact a literary agent to try to get into a major publication as essentially a soft cover. So it's a lot cheaper. It would probably be available as an ebook, which means people could, download it and read it for even less money. And my main goal in doing this is simply to help people, because when I was transitioning out of Christianity, there weren't a whole lot of people to help me. You've got to understand, when I started using the internet more readily in 2007, atheism and Satanism and all these groups were still relatively underground. They had an early presence on the internet, but it wasn't the sort of presence where you could simply find somebody and ask them questions. It took me a little bit of time to find people, and Reverend Jack Winters, Winters being one of the main people that I talked to around that time, because he was one of the first independent Satanists that was there from the United Satanic Empire. He's semi-active still currently. He had some medical issues going on, so he's been on and off for the last couple of years. But I had to seek people out to get this sort of help with my own transition, because even though I was going my own way, I was making my own path as I went along and studying on my own, I still needed somebody to reassure me that, yes, it's perfectly acceptable to do this. And by the way, here's some recommendations for literature, here are some, recommendations for, whatever the case may be. Here's how to feel better about the whole Jesus hates you issue. I always thought it was funny because they've got this all-loving fucking God who sends most of his creation to hell. It's a complete contradiction. That alone, in my mind, disproves the entire notion of Christianity, saying either that their God doesn't exist, or is a tyrant, or doesn't have that nature, and everyone goes to heaven, like in the book of Enoch. The Gospel of Nicodemus. But people, they don't want to accept that within Christianity. So I'm going to write a book on this subject. And I'm going to write it as quickly as possible while still making it, number one, interesting, number two, grammatically coherent. The point being, I want everyone to be able to access this specific system that I have built, that I believe, based on what I've seen talking to other people, helps them through the guilt and the fear. That's basically its sole purpose. It's going to go into politics. There's a section on how any legitimate form of Satanism would have to view certain current movements. I myself feel Satanism to be a libertarian movement, primarily speaking. The very idea of being yourself, doing what you want, relies upon essentially at least a selfish libertarian view. I always found it funny that certain people were statists and they were calling themselves Satanists or devil worshippers, not understanding the archetype of Satan was never about that sort of. If you want that, you go to the Christian God, which is all-controlling and egotistical. So I'm going to write this book. And to those of you who have messaged me in the last few weeks saying, well, I want to learn more about Satanism, I want to convert to Satanism, I want to convert to your specific type of Satanism, it takes me a lot longer to do that than it will to actually, literally writing a full book. If I were totally hyped up on caffeine and weren't being distracted, I could probably do it in a week. So I've written 30, 40 pages in a day before. It's not a problem as long as I'm interested in the material. The problem is dealing with distractions, because as I've said before, I also have to take care of my elderly grandfather, and when he's in full Alzheimer's mode, he doesn't stop asking questions, sometimes for several hours. But I'm going to fly through that as quickly as possible. I'm going to try, and if any of you have any experience as authors and have worked with a literary agent, tell me how the hell to do that. Because for my first two books, I'm working with small publishers. I don't really need an agent. The sums proposed are not all that large anyway. The number of things being printed isn't that large. So even though I'm going to get paid for my work and it's going to be released, it's small batch. It's specialty, it's niche. That's the way those small publishers work. If I'm going to work with someone who's capable of keeping up with the apparent demand of a book like this, it's going to need to be at least a moderately large publisher, if not one of the big six. And I think, judging from the success of something like the Satanic Bible, that a well-written manuscript of this kind, sort of modernizing Satanism in response to new ideas, new current events, the way the world works now that LaVey never could have imagined when he wrote the Satanic Bible, I think it would have quite an audience. So if you could help me out there, that would be good. So for those of you who have messaged me in the last week or two, if you are still watching my content and see this, I will try to get to your messages. I'm not blowing you off. I'm not trying to ignore you. But you got to realize I do other things too, including writing satanic tracts. So that's how that issue goes. That's what I'm currently up to. My hope is to be done with that as quickly as possible, while keeping it well written and well thought out. So this philosophy actually works. I may describe a rough outline of this text in a video in the next few days, so people know sort of what they're getting, or possibly not. But I'm already talking to half a dozen people right now about this issue. It's not that I don't want to help as many people as possible, it's that I'm being stretched too thin. And if you're already talking to me, holding a conversation about Satanism, don't think this video is directed at you or anything like that. I'm obviously still going to continue our conversations. I'm talking mainly to people that I haven't gotten back to yet. There's sort of a backlog because the traffic now, when 10 people message you at the same time asking to be converted to Satanism, short of copy-pasting the same response, you can't get to them all in a reasonable frame of time. And I'm not just going to copy-paste the response because the response differs depending on what they need in their life. I have to ask them questions in order to know how to help them more easily. But this book, I think, for the majority of people will give them a basic outline of how to do it themselves. Because really, you have to, if you are going to be satanic, and you're going to help yourself be free of guilt and fear, and you're going to live your life in that quasi-deified manner, you have to be the one to choose that path. You have to do most of the work yourself. I can help you. There are others who can help you. Mostly it's about you, and it's generally a solitary path. Doesn't mean you become, isolated sociopath and start smearing your shit on the walls, but it does mean that you have to be able to lead yourself. You become your own master. The master of the self is the master of all around them. Most people in this world are not their own masters. They go to work 9 to 5. They never think about any big issues. They're just thinking of their paycheck. Nothing wrong with a 9 to 5 job, but really they're complete drones. They're boring. They're sheep. They have no clue what's going on in the world. They have no greater ambition in life. To them, life is just existence. It's nihilistic in the utmost order without actually being nihilism, because they think there's a purpose to life. They just never actually live it. That's about all. Peace out.